Welcome to Neuqua Connection. I'm your host, Kevin Schaefer, and I'm sitting down with Earl Talbot, music producer, drummer, and educator. So, the first question I have for you is, what got you into music?
What got me into music? Well, I'll tell you what, I've always loved music. A lot like most of us, we find a connection somehow with a genre of music or several genres. But I became a musician when I was so frustrated, sitting with my father in the car, listening to an old jazz record, and I could feel the rhythm, but I couldn't really get my hands to bang out the rhythm on the dashboard, and I thought, oh God, I gotta figure this out. And so that's what really started my passion for drumming and rhythm.
Awesome.
As a 9-year-old, maybe.
What are some of the bands that influenced you?
Over the years, I've appreciated a lot of different artists and bands. When I was a kid, I was introduced to a lot of metal, of course, and you had bands like Rush and The Who, and then I went on to listen to jazz and appreciate fusion music, Billy Cobham and Chick Corea, and by the time I was about 11 years old, it was kind of the beginnings of the hip-hop era, so I would find myself in the record store digging through crates of KRS-One, Boogie Down Productions, and some of the first groups out of New York before we started making hip-hop in Chicago. So all over the place, Bach, Mozart, everybody.
Awesome. So did anyone in your family inspire you?
Actually, yeah, my granddad on my mom's side, he would play piano by ear, and he had a whole library of songs that he could just sit down and play. And so that did inspire me, his kind soul as well. So I thought maybe I'll follow along in his footsteps, yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have any kids that are currently playing anything?
Kids?
Mm-hmm.
I do. I have a son who's 14, and he can beat the drum kit. He likes to make beats, and he played some cello and clarinet, but now he's a basketballer, and so he's spending all his time practicing and training for basketball, which I'm 100% behind, yeah.
Definitely. I know you mentioned your interest started when you were around 9, but when did you actually start to play drums?
Drumming at the age of 10 really is when I first got my hands on some drumsticks, maybe 9.5, 10. But I started playing piano as a 4-year-old, and so I was playing Suzuki method for piano early on. Yeah.
Do you remember what your first band was like, and can you tell me a little about that experience?
Yeah, my first band, we were called Azure Blue, Azure Blue, and the color blue. And I was a freshman at Lincoln Park High School, and we had a couple seniors in the band and a couple adults, guys who were older in their 20s. And we played a bunch of covers. We played Ozzy Osbourne, we played Rush covers, we played Sting, the Police songs, and several others, and started writing our own tunes. So we took it pretty seriously, and we were playing in clubs that year, and the following year, my sophomore year, so my parents would join and make sure I could get in and not cause any trouble.
Definitely, that's cool. But obviously you've come a long way from there. So how did you get to your current position?
Throughout high school, I realized that it was through education that I would become a musician that I'd be satisfied in my own, with my own skill set. I'd have to work really hard at it. In the beginning, you don't really have an idea of what it'll take. And although I feel like I have some natural talent, although finding myself frustrated on the dashboard, I found that I would have to spend maybe even more time than others practicing, really getting it together. So throughout high school, I would play the clubs in Chicago, and I was the first to play drums with DJs in the late 80s, early 90s. And so I would join up with DJs Mark Farina, Derek Carter. These are early house and hip-hop DJs out of Chicago. And I would play in all the nightclubs. So again, that was an entry for me, but I still felt limited. I felt like there was so much more, and there's always so much more to learn. So from there, I went into a record deal right out of high school with what was Polygram, now Universal Records. And my first band, signed band, was Crunch-O-Matic. We toured, we were on MTV, it was fantastic. I met tons of artists, but at the same time, would have to move on and go to college to really learn music theory, music notation, really dig into jazz and all the greats in classical music. And so I found that doing so really opened me up for the experience of my lifetime, which was going to France and finding such an amazing teacher in a guy named Christian Bourdon from Cameroon. When I got to France in '94, I dropped my bags because the guy was probably the best drummer I'd ever seen in my life. And I thought I'd seen all the greats, visiting concerts and checking out every record I could get my hands on. Here I saw a guy who blew my mind with his coordination. And so I stayed in France, and I ended up going multi-platinum in France on the microphone, actually rapping with a band called Nomads. And that song's Yaka Lelo. And we sold 1 million records in a few months. And I ended up going to Africa, to Cameroon, exploring things. So I'd become the eternal student at the same time that I'd become a professional musician. So really, to answer your question, I mean, there's a long road and many different experiences, but most importantly, I stayed in this kind of education mode where I always kept my antenna up for new things and new possibilities and learning the craft from sound to not only my skills on drum set, but learning how to handle a microphone, learning how to mix a record, and those kind of technical things too. Yeah, I hope that's clear.
Definitely.
That was a start.
Definitely. Obviously, you've been through an incredible amount of experiences along the way, but do you remember any particular stories?
You know, one great story, when I was, which comes to mind about my career, when I was in Crunch-O-Matic, again as an 18-year-old, I met a guy named Parker Lee, and Parker was from the Bronx, and he was a DJ, and he was a real thing. You know, he came in to Chicago, Tim's and his parka, and he came hard, and he was a great DJ. He knew exactly what he wanted sound-wise, so I worked with him a little bit, and I was really impressed. Then I went away to France, spent a decade over in France, and then I come back in 2003, and I'm downtown at a cafe, not far from where Oprah's Harpo Studios was, and I see Parker come in with a whole crowd of people in this little cafe as I'm sipping coffee. He said, "Earl, you've been to Africa. I heard you were in Africa. My goodness, where have you been? Do you have any beats?" And I said, well, of course I got beats. I had been writing and composing a lot of different tracks. And he said, you know, I'm working for Oprah now. I'm her music director. And so I said, well, that's fantastic. Let's check out what's going on. And I went to visit him at the studio, and I brought all my songs. And he said, Earl, we're going to develop a music library. You're going to be one of the first composers on it. We're going to handpick composers from around the world, and we're going to build Oprah's library of her own music, so that then, instead of just leasing music from other producers and paying out a lot of money, we would then go ahead and create the first library for Oprah. So that was 2005, and since I made 96 songs in total for the show and for Dr. Oz and for use with Harpo Productions. So I would get a chance to turn on, you know, Oprah and hear my music being played, and inserts, bumpers, theme music, and that kind of thing. So you never know who you're going to meet and how things are going to play out. So you better be cool with everybody you meet and have a genuine kind of respect for each other. So Parker helped me out a lot, so did Oprah, and I'm very thankful for that. But again, you never know where people are going to end up. Yeah.
All right, so obviously you played at a lot of awesome places and for a lot of awesome people, but what made you so interested in wanting to produce music as well?
Well, I think most musicians who enter a studio and finally start to express themselves, whether they're vocalists or instrumentalists, you feel somewhat curious about how things are going down. If you have a limited understanding, and let's say you're a drummer, you go in and, can you give me more bass in my bass drum? You know, speaking to an audio engineer, you'd ask for things to be a little different, but maybe not have the ability to express yourself and really get control of your own sound. For me, I wanted control over my own sound. I was fascinated with it. I would hear different records and think, well, this guy's not getting me the sound that I want. How can I help the situation? And so I dove right into producing because I was also a composer, but feeling like I wanted to be able to control my sound and get on record what was going on in my head. So that would mean learning about EQ, compression, learning about separation in a mix and that kind of thing, and really having experience with that to be able to do it quickly and get things accomplished. So that's what really gave me the itch to want to produce. Yeah.
Definitely awesome. Well, that seems to be all the time we have, but thank you so much for sitting down with me and telling me all this stuff. This has been Neuqua Connection with Kevin Schaefer.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.